So this week I'm going to talk to you a little bit about one of my pet peeves. And I asked this question in the critical reflection paper because I wanted you guys to hear this question. But a lot of times in society, we say, why does a victim stay in that relationship? Right? That's a very normal question for people to ask. And that is a pet peeve of mine. I don't generally like that question. And it's in social work, when I teach classes like generalist practice class or things like that, we learn about asking questions, right? And so when we're working with a client, um, we're asking them questions to kind of probe and to dig deeper and to have them talk with us more. Well, anytime we ask a why question, immediately people get defensive. And for very good reason. Why is a very blaming question. Well, why did you do that? Right. And so as soon as someone asks me that, I'm immediately going to be like, I did it because of this kind of thing. And I get very defensive because of that question. So if we reframe the question, oftentimes we can have a better understanding. So if we reframe it to what keeps survivors in an abusive relationship, that is not a blaming question. That is a question that is trying to help us understand what keeps them in a relationship. It's a very interesting trick to try even at home with your partner or your children. Instead of asking them, well, why did you do that? Maybe say, well, what led you to do that? Or what are some of the reasons that you thought you could do that or you should do that kind of thing. And anyways, and so it's an interesting thing to try and practice reframing that why question, because as a society, we ask that question a lot. And oftentimes we ask them of abusers or victims when we should be asking it of abusers. Why do abusers abuse? Right? And so we should be asking that question. We should be putting the blame on the abusers instead of why did she stay is a very blaming question of the victim. So we're going to talk a little bit about what keeps survivors in an abusive relationship. And so some of you guys talked about some of these things in your critical reflection paper, but we're going to talk about it a little more. So one of the things, victims who stay in abusive relationships are weak. Think about that question as we go along, and maybe write down some notes or some things. Again, these would be great critical reflection papers to post in your weekly discussion board posts. So kind of jot down some notes as we go along and maybe think of some questions. So there is a link here. I'm going to put a link to this in Blackboard for you to take a look at. It's called This Is Not a Love Story. So for advocates, a profound and core principle is that all victims, adult and child, should be able to live free from violence and control, right? And so that is one of the things that we advocate for as a whole in society, living life free from violence and control. And one of the things that we struggle with as advocates is our belief that they have to leave the relationship. And so letting go of leaving as the primary safety strategy does not sacrifice that as a principle. Rather, it makes room for new and different approaches to enhance safety for all victims. So leaving an abusive relationship, let's talk about that real quick. When you leave an abusive relationship, there's research that supports that you are significantly more likely to be killed when you are leaving an abusive relationship. And so a survivor or a victim may not leave because they know that's the most dangerous thing for them to do at that time. So we as advocates really need to take a step back from either asking them to leave or forcing them to leave, because they know that very well could be a life and death situation for them. So when is staying an effective strategy, right? So staying could very well be a strategy for the victim and understanding their own personal safety. I always tell survivors, you know your partner the best. You know him better than I do. You know his strengths, you know his weaknesses. You know when he's on edge. You know when you're most vulnerable and most at risk. So you are the expert, and I am going to trust you to tell me what we need to do to make your safety plan, right? So keep that in mind kind of as we go forward. So we're going to be talking about something called the power and control wheel, which you may have heard about before. So this power and control wheel talks about different tactics that an abuser uses to exert power and control over their partner, right? So we're going to talk about each one here. We're going to talk about emotional abuse, right? So this is the name calling, putting her down, making her think she's crazy. I had a victim that I was working with one time who made dinner every night for their partner. And this particular night, she made chicken and green beans and mashed potatoes. And she had it on the table, ready to go as soon as he got home. And as soon as he walked in the door, she could tell from his body language and his behavior that something was not right. And so he walks over and he grabs his plate of chicken and he throws it against the wall and shatters the plate everywhere. And he said, I told you I didn't want chicken tonight for dinner. I told you I wanted steak. And she was racking her brain trying to remember when he told her that. Well, he didn't tell her that. This was his mind game that he's playing with her to emotionally manipulate and emotionally abuse her. Another form is economic abuse. So this is one that's becoming more and more popular in the research because it's a very significant barrier for survivors to be able to leave an abusive relationship. And so it's things like taking all of the money, not letting her keep a job, giving her an allowance, ruining her credit. That's another big one that we see in the literature that really prohibits her from being able to get an apartment or a house going forward. So economic abuse is a very large tactic that abusers use, and that is a large reason why a lot of times victims struggle in leaving. Sexual abuse, making her do sexual things against her will, physically attacking her, treating her like a sex object. Those are all, I talked a lot about sexual abuse in the week 1 PowerPoint. Using the children, right? Making her feel guilty about the children, threatening to take the children away. Well, if you leave me, I'm going to call CPS. If you call the police, they're going to take the children away. Using visitation as a way to harass her. Another one is threats, making or carrying out threats in order to hurt her emotionally. I had a survivor who was in my weekly support group, and when we talked about this, she said her partner every single night before bed would sleep with a gun under his pillow, and every night he would look at the gun and he would look at her and he would give her this death glare, and he would put the gun under the pillow and then go to sleep. And she knew that was a threat to her. If she were to leave or if she were to do anything that he didn't want her to do. Then we have using male privilege. So this is a power and control wheel in a heterosexual relationship. And so instead of using male privilege, it might look different in a same-sex relationship. But one of my survivors in my support group called this the King Kong syndrome, right? So I am the king of the castle. I'm the king, and you are my servant. I'm the master. A lot of times they use biblical passages and biblical reasons for this. So that is another tactic that they use. Intimidation, right? Looking at her and putting her in fear just by actions or gestures, smashing things, destroying the property, putting a hole in the wall. I had a survivor say once he beat the wall and said, "Next time that's going to be your face." That's an intimidation tactic. Isolation. So this is again controlling what she does, who she sees, who she talks to, where she goes. Um, Everything is controlled and very limited in what she can do. I had a survivor who was working, and her partner would check her odometer on her car every single day to make sure that she was only going to work and back and wasn't going anywhere else. And so she was coming home from work one day and she got stuck in traffic. And she knew if she was late getting home that he would be mad and he would punish her. And so she had to decide between taking a different route to get home and hoping that he didn't check her odometer, or being late getting home and risking him being mad because she was late getting home. So it's things like that kind of control that we're talking about. And so when we look at this power and control wheel, really a lot of these things on here, sexual abuse, very specific things with sexual abuse, and some specific threats. Everything else is not criminally enforceable, right? So you can't charge someone for calling you names, right? You can't charge someone with domestic violence for looking at you a certain way. Um, and so that's something to really think about, is how do we address this in the criminal justice system? These are all power and control tactics that they're very um, manipulative, and they know where they can draw the line. And so I would have survivors who would only be hit in their stomach area, where they can put on a shirt and it would cover it up. And so they were smart not to hit them in the face or the arms or anywhere where they would leave a bruise that people could see. Different things like that. Yeah, so again, some of these are from the power and control wheel: coercion and threats, intimidation, isolation, minimizes, denies, and blames. So we often hear, well, if you hadn't blank, then I wouldn't have hit you, right? If you hadn't cooked the wrong meal, then none of this would have happened, right? And so they're blaming their survivor for this, and survivors accept that he's right. If I, had just made what he wanted for dinner, then none of this would have happened. And so that starts to really affect survivors mentally and emotionally. Using children, mutual friends, economic abuse, emotional abuse. So this is a TED Talk that I am going to, again, post the link in Blackboard for you to take a look at. So if we do ask this question, why do victims stay? A lot of times they may stay for economic reasons. They don't have money to leave. They may stay for the kids. They may stay for fear of losing their children. many times in an abusive relationship, I talked in the first week about the cycle of um, an abusive relationship and how there's this honeymoon phase that individuals go through. And in this honeymoon phase, there is this hope that an abuser will change. There's this hope that things will get better. The promises that are made, the things that are done, really turns around during the honeymoon phase. I had one survivor who said literally 90% of her relationship was phenomenal, right? It was great. It was this honeymoon phase. They were great. They did great. It was that 10% of the relationship that was awful and was terrible. And so could she put up with that 10% in order to get that 90% amazingness? And so it's that hope of that 90 becoming 100% one day. And then there's also this love, right? So they didn't go on their first date and he hit her at the end of the day, right? I don't know that I don't know that many people would stay in a relationship where there was abuse on the first date, right? And so they fall in love like any relationship, and there's staying up until 2 a.m. talking, and flowers, and going on dates, and doing things together, and there's that love that happens, and they're together for a long time, and that love doesn't just go away. Then something happens and something changes, and then that's when their relationship slowly starts to transition. um so another very real thing that people don't think about is the fear. So leaving an abusive relationship doesn't mean that he is not going to find you. That doesn't mean that it's just going to stop, right? Then the stalking may start, or the harassing family and friends, or the harassment at their employment or their job, right? So there just because someone leaves an abusive relationship doesn't mean that it stops. The abuser isn't going to give up that easily, right? They may have no place to go, a lack of resources, that isolation keeps them away from friends and family, and they may not have a place to go. So here's a really great activity that I'm going to have you guys do. Again, I'm going to post the link, and I want you to think about, as you go through this, what are some of the reasons that you chose for them to stay? What are some strengths? What are some of the ways that we can aid someone who stays? Right. So I want you to take a look at that activity, and I want you to know that women do leave every single day. Um, they leave, and multiple times they might leave, and so keep that in mind, that this idea that women don't leave abusive relationships, because they absolutely do. So again, I want you to think, victims who stay in abusive relationships are weak. How did you answer that at the beginning of this PowerPoint? And did your answer change after going through this? So thank you guys so much. And I hope you have a great week. And I look forward to reading your posts.